ACURX Pharmaceuticals is a publicly held clinical stage biopharmaceutical company developing a new class of antibiotics for infections caused by bacteria listed as priority pathogens by the World Health Organization, the CDC, and also the FDA. And with me is CEO David Lucci. Great to have you back here. And it's been a few months since we talked, so bring me up to date on where the clinical trials are going and what's been happening at ACURX.
Great to be with you, Jane, and glad to be back at the NASDAQ as always. So where we are today and have been working for the past few months dutifully is on partnerships, grants, M&A activity, financing activity, basically putting together a multi-step approach to financing our phase 3 trials.
And this is for the C. diff?
This is for the C. diff program, and also for the second program, which we'll talk about now, is not just MRSA, now it includes anthrax.
Okay.
So we're going to be putting funding together, resource together for all of that. The primary objective is to get our lead antibiotic going into phase 3 through the phase 3 trials as promptly as we can, to get the drug to market as promptly as we can, while doing it as non-dilutively as we can for our shareholders' benefit.
So when do you think that might, say in a perfect world, that timetable? What would that be?
So I think in 2025, in the first quarter, we'll be starting enrollment in the first phase 3 clinical trial of the two that are required. I think it'll be a couple of years in phase 3. I don't mind the time that takes prior to filing for approval, because in those couple of years, we'll be able to get our second antibiotic candidate, ACURX 375, into clinical trials for MRSA with label extension to anthrax. So I think at that point, we will be in a really good position 2 years from now.
So let's talk a little bit more about the anthrax, because that's new since the last time we talked. Is this the same C. diff drug that can also be used for that? Explain that. Sure.
No, it's not the C. diff program, because that's more of a kind of like an internal Band-Aid, they call it. The second program, ACURX 375, is for internal systemic infections, and it's that program that we tested at an independent laboratory, University of Florida. One of the world's most famous doctors that does this sort of thing, tested us against anthrax bacteria and found very low concentrations of our medicine are needed in order to kill the anthrax bacteria in a laboratory study setting. But our expert at U of F went one step further. The standard of care for anthrax and what gets stockpiled by the federal government in governments around the world is ciprofloxacin. So our doctor, our medic at University of Florida, tested our medicine against ciprofloxacin-resistant bacteria and found very compelling data. It takes very little of our antibiotic to kill ciprofloxacin-resistant bacteria, meaning the standard of care for anthrax doesn't work. So there's nothing left in the stockpile to use. And that's where we get introduced.
Any other significant discoveries while you were going through these clinical trials that maybe was a surprise?
Yes, well, that was a surprise, as you say. The second surprise, and this too was presented at the Bled Slovenia conference last week. The second surprise is our world-class Dr. Kevin Gary, microbiome expert, and our medical director, Mike Silverman, they discovered a way to proactively tell while a patient is taking antibiotics for C. difficile infection. They can tell by the end of the 3rd day of treatment in a 10-day treatment regimen if that patient is going to reinfect. And the clinician, if he uses a little test kit that we would develop and provide, could then swap that patient out onto another antibiotic, because the reinfection C. diff market is $4.7 billion a year. And worse than that, 30,000 people die. And those who die from C. diff aren't the mild cases. They're the people that continually reinfect. So you want to stay out of that bucket of continually getting the reinfection, where you're cured and then you reinfect, and so on and so forth. That is where sometimes you wind up in death.
So next year seems like a pivotal year for you. Where do you see ACURX in two years, say? Well,
in 2 years, I think we'll be in the clinic with our second drug that's going to be targeting MRSA and anthrax. Our first drug should be done with its first phase 3, validated statistically significant data with one phase 3 left to go. And at that point, I can't tell you how valuable this thing would be. I also think the World Health Organization met last week here in New York, and there is clamor from the regulatory bodies and the scientific community about antimicrobial resistance. And the WHO last week put out a call to arms for every member state to put together an action plan and come back with the action plan to demonstrate how that member state is going to combat antimicrobial resistance by financing and developing new classes of antibiotics to treat antimicrobial resistant bacteria. And lo and behold, I don't know of any phase 3 new class of antibiotics other than ours being developed, at least here in the U.S. And we are a new class. We seem to be well poised. So in terms of when you think about grant funding for antimicrobial resistance, I mean, what leadership would it show if Staten Island would be able to say that we sponsored the first new class of antibiotics to fight antimicrobial resistance, and the first one to be approved in 35 years.
Yeah.
And that's where we could be in the near future.
Okay. Well, I hope you come back in the first quarter, say, next year, and bring us up to date on all these interesting things you have going on.
Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Jane.
David.